So I was 46 years old when I got diagnosed with ADHD. It took almost a half of a century to get a diagnosis for that, even though I recognize now that I had ADHD my entire life. And I was holding everything together until I could not hold everything together any longer. And the point at which that happened was when I went through the worst symptoms of perimenopause and then eventually menopause. So, if you are someone that is all of a sudden starting to forget things, you're losing focus, you feel like you are constantly failing, you feel like you are constantly overwhelmed with all of the tasks in your life, but nothing has really changed or not too much has changed. If you are feeling like you are not able to do life like you used to or do life like other people, then this video is for you. I just want to share my experience with being diagnosed with ADHD and its connection to perimenopause, and then also just kind of why this is an issue for women in particular, why they're underdiagnosed, and what you can do to make sure that that doesn't happen. Okay, so I used to think that ADHD was kind of the hyperactive little boy, right? Like the hyperactive little boy disorder, the boy that's bouncing off the walls in the classroom. And that was just kind of the picture I had in my mind. And the big reason why I thought that was because I had that boy. I had my son was absolutely that kid that was bouncing off the walls, got diagnosed, pretty young with ADHD. And we had to manage that. He's an adult now. He's almost 25. But that was the picture I had in my head. Now, slowly, other people in my family were diagnosed as well, my two daughters, and then eventually my husband. I was the very last one to actually get diagnosed. And I think a big part of me just kind of really thought that I couldn't possibly have it because my symptoms didn't look like theirs. Even my daughter's symptoms looked very different. And that was probably also because they're younger, number one. And number two, because they're in school and I'm doing mom things and working and have a very different level of responsibilities, right? Women are often women are often masters of masking their symptoms. They use coping strategies incredibly well because they don't have a choice, especially when they are moms. We don't have a choice but to do all of the planning and the taking care of things and the cooking dinner and taking care of the kids and the doctor's appointments, report cards, and all of those things. And so we can often just overlook a lot of the symptoms that might come from ADHD just because we have no choice but to keep going and to keep caring for people. And that is a huge reason why women are underdiagnosed, because we just keep going. And then there's not the hyperactivity part of it, because often girls don't have that, whether they are children or adults. Sometimes they do, but often not. I don't have the hyperactivity part of it like my son did, in the sense that, he had to be constantly going, doing, learning, opening drawers, taking things apart. I didn't have that, but I do have something where like my body can't stay still. Like, look how much I'm using my hands when I talk. Like, I have these little, like these toys everywhere in my house because I can't just sit at my desk if I'm not typing or I don't know, in a church or something like that where I have to sit still. I cannot sit still. So I often have things like this so that I can fidget, so that my body can move. I just thought that was normal. You don't know what you don't know, right? Because we're in our own bodies. And so we don't know what it feels like to be in someone else's body. So I just figured that, that it was totally normal. But so many of us don't recognize ADHD symptoms because it looks different. It looks a lot more like being forgetful, being distracted. And this is a big one: being overwhelmed. I feel like I have been overwhelmed the majority of my life. Honestly, I'm not even exaggerating. The majority of my life. And I often looked at other women and really thought to myself, like, I don't understand how they're doing this. Like, how are they doing life? How are they organizing things? How are they showing up to appointments on time? How are they juggling all these balls in the air and seemingly doing it well? And I know some of that is just like, we can't compare to other people, right? I get that. But I just knew that something was different with me. I knew that I wasn't managing things like other people were. And I knew that I just felt overwhelmed the majority of the time. And that is a huge symptom when it comes to women and ADHD. And so, because my symptoms didn't look like my family members, I just didn't connect the dots for a long time. Now, again, I have to preface this by saying I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, I am not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, I am not any kind of medical professional. But what I do have is some experience with perimenopause and menopause and ADHD. I do have a story to tell and that I would love to share with you guys and just share what I've been through. And I have done a lot of research and a lot of advocating for myself in finding professionals and getting myself help. So that's what I would like to share with you. You guys have to find your own journey and talk to your own professionals. So obviously, none of this is medical advice. Just getting that out of the way, right? So everybody at this point a few years ago had been diagnosed with ADHD in my family, got everybody else taken care of. And again, I think I was holding it together until I couldn't, until the perimenopause rolled along, rocked my freaking world, and created a lot of symptoms that I just couldn't mask anymore, that I couldn't function anymore. And when this all kind of came to head, or when I had an aha moment, I should say, is I can't even remember where it was, if it was like a paper, like magazine, or if it was online, but the ADDitude, meaning ADDitude website, it's a foundation or a company that does a lot of stuff with ADHD. And they had a quiz that was specifically for women. So it was an ADHD quiz for women specifically. And I took the shorter version of it, I think, and then I found a longer version. So the shorter version had whatever, 10 or 12 questions. And it, gave the little quiz results and said, yeah, you probably have ADHD. And then I went and found the complete quiz, which had 50 questions of it, or 50 questions inside of it. And I'll make sure that I link that in the description of this video. So if you guys want to check that out, you can. That was such a, I can't even describe it. It makes me emotional thinking about it. It was such an overwhelming sense of just being able to identify myself and say like, oh, maybe there's not something wrong with me. Like maybe I'm not just lazy and unorganized and stupid and all these things that I've told myself and compared myself to other people. Maybe this is what's going on, because I answered all of those questions, and almost every single one of them, I just kind of said to myself like, oh my gosh, that's me. That's me. That's me. That's me. And it all at that point made sense. And I don't want to say that that was the end of it, because obviously I still had a lot of work to do, and I still do. Nothing is perfect, right? But that was the time, that was the point in which I really connected the dots and realized that there was something else going on, and that I had just been coping pretty well, honestly. Like I have a pretty successful life. I was coping until I could cope no more. And that the change in hormones was my breaking point where I could not cope anymore. So I will make sure to link that quiz, because that was really powerful for me. But it helped me realize I wasn't just overwhelmed, and that I had actually probably been managing just completely undiagnosed ADHD all those years. I did eventually move on and find a medical professional that properly diagnosed me, and then made some medication recommendations. I also made a lot of changes to my life, and I'll talk about those in a second. But I also want to point out how perimenopause really amplified my symptoms, because like I said, that was the point in which everything fell apart and I was just a hot mess, right? And so it's important that we know that connection, because before like perimenopause came into play, like I had some systems into place, not great. Like most of the time I was, kind of winging it, but I could stay fairly productive and organized, and maybe I might miss an appointment here or there. I'm not maybe the best at returning texts or phone calls, but I was doing it. Like I was doing life and I was doing okay. And then when all of these perimenopause symptoms hit, all of those strategies and the things that I had just figured out over the course of decades just did not work anymore. I would walk into a room and completely forget why I was there, over and over and over and over. Tasks that used to take 5 minutes were impossible to start, and then they just took forever. I could not stay focused on one thing. I was constantly seeking what I recognize now is kind of like a hit of dopamine. I was not able to do anything that required more than one or two steps. And so I would often fall into traps of avoiding whatever I needed to do and going onto social media or something so that my brain just had that kind of instant reward. I just could not push myself to do anything. And then the emotional ups and downs just became a lot harder to manage. And I felt more overwhelmed than I ever have in my entire life. And I have felt overwhelmed a lot. So it just all became super unmanageable. And now I really understand that that's the connection. Estrogen plays a huge role in dopamine regulation. So it's really controlling our dopamine in so many ways and affecting all of that. And a lot of the experts now know that people with ADHD already have lower levels of dopamine. So imagine if you already have lower levels of dopamine, this chemical that we need in our brain, and then you hit perimenopause and it goes even lower, this is a recipe for disaster, right? And so things like focus and memory and emotional regulation that can all take a huge hit as estrogen starts to decline. And by the time, I think I've mentioned this in another video, by the time I got on HRT, I had 0 undetectable levels of estrogen, estradiol, progesterone, and very low levels of testosterone. So I basically had no sex hormones floating around in my body. So can you imagine what that was doing to my brain? So the symptoms that really got worse for me were forgetfulness, procrastination was terrible, emotional sensitivity, the ability to finish things, decision fatigue. Oh my gosh, can we talk about this for a second? I'm still kind of bad at this, honestly. I could not make a basic decision. Like I could not get on Amazon and buy, I don't know, a spatula. It just seemed so overwhelming. And it seemed like a life and death decision. And it seemed like it was something I could not overcome. That was not fun. It was just completely overwhelming. I couldn't make any decision what to wear or what to say or what to do or what to work on or how to parent my kids or how to talk to my husband. It just all got way too hard. And I recognize now that it was all tied to the ADHD. Remember too that a lot of ADHD symptoms are very tied to anxiety. Sometimes it's hard to untangle those two. So the decision fatigue is also kind of related to anxiety. So those two kind of go hand in hand. So I just want you to know that if this is something you're experiencing and it really just kind of came out when your perimenopause or menopause symptoms showed up, there's probably a connection because those hormones just play a much bigger role than you think. So here are some of the things that helped me, and I want to share them with you so that maybe you can use some of these tips and make this time easier. Maybe you might get diagnosed, maybe you don't. Maybe you might get diagnosed and take medication. Maybe you just use other strategies. But again, let's arm ourselves with as much information as we can so we can make the best decisions for us and our health. That's all that matters, because we're getting to the point here where our kids are doing their thing and they're going to be out of the house. And who are we going to be left with? Maybe a husband or a wife or whoever, but mostly we are going to be left with ourselves. And we have to take the best care of ourselves because we've taken care of everybody else. And so now it's our turn, right? Here's the things that helped me. Finding that quiz obviously was huge for me. It was a real sense of just feeling validated, but then also I knew at that point that I needed to do something because I knew something else was going on. So I made sure to find a provider that understood ADHD and was able to get me diagnosed. And make sure that you find someone that really gets it, right? Especially if it's kind of tied to hormones. It's hard to find someone that understands both hormones and ADHD, but at least get the ADHD side of it covered, and then you can kind of work on the hormones with a different provider if you need to. I am on medication now, but sometimes, hormonal changes can affect how ADHD medications work, especially how we metabolize things and how they work in our bodies. So just be aware that, you may not hit a home run on the very first medication or the first dosage. You may have to play around with it a little bit if you do decide to do medication. And I think I did pretty well right away, but that's not always the case. May not be the case for you, or maybe you might. But just be aware that it might take some fine tuning there. And then I really had to lower my expectations for myself. I could not operate at the same way that I did before. I also had to let my family know that they could not have the same expectations of me that they did even the year before, because I physically, mentally, and emotionally, spiritually, every way you can possibly imagine, could not function at that level anymore. So I had to have actually not just one, many conversations with my husband and my kids and my family, and just say, look, this is what I'm going through right now. I can't do it. I need you guys to step up and do this. I need to be able to take care of myself over here. Whatever my needs were, I had to speak up about it because I didn't have a choice. I couldn't do it. It wasn't an option. So it was like, I better say something or we're in trouble here, because I couldn't keep going the way that I was. And so I just lowered the bar for myself. And I don't want to say that doesn't mean I'm not still a good person, and it doesn't mean you're not a good person and that we're not trying hard. That's not what it is. It's just kind of readjusting our expectations of ourselves and what we consider success, and doing the same with our families and communicating all of that so that they understand that what we're going through as well. The other thing that really helped me was I had to put really a lot of systems in place that were visual, lots of calendars, both digital and just paper calendars, like on my desk, on the fridge. I'm still not the best. Still I'll show up for an appointment that was a day after, or I will double book something. It's hard. The executive function side of it is still difficult for me, but having a to-do list that's really organized and having lots of digital reminders, maybe finding an app that works for you. Also, not multitasking as much. Ladies, we can't multitask as much when we are in perimenopause and menopause, and especially if we have ADHD. I used to be able to have all these balls up in the air. Can't do it anymore, because what I realized was I was just spreading myself so thin and I was doing nothing well, not one of them. So I had to have fewer balls in the air so that the one or two balls, hopefully just one, I was actually doing well, and it was much easier for me to manage that. So less multitasking was a huge part of it. And then just accepting and letting go that, accepting that good enough is good enough, and that has to be enough for me, for my family, for those around me. And I'm not perfect at this. I still have times where I really beat myself up if I don't do something as well as I think I should, or I screw up an appointment, or I disappoint my kids. I'm still hard on myself, but I've gotten better at forgiving myself, knowing that it's okay, knowing that I'm doing the best that I can, and that's really been life-changing. So just to kind of wrap things up, I wish I would have known that ADHD I knew it looked different in girls. Okay, I knew that logically, especially having both a boy, a son and daughters. I knew that, but for some reason, I just thought it was different for me and that I didn't apply the rules. I don't know. I just dismissed it as just being busy or tired or whatever. And then I really wish I would have recognized that sooner, that it is very different, especially in adult women and adult women in this stage of life. Also, just knowing that the perimenopause can just magnify those symptoms, all those hormones, especially the estrogen going down, is just going to mess with your brain chemistry in a way that has never happened before for us during these hormonal times. You are not lazy. You're not lazy. You are not failing. You are not a bad person. You are not a terrible mom. You're not a terrible wife. It's none of those things. You just need some help, and you need some new systems in place to be able to manage your life. And I feel like I feel like I end my video every time by saying the same thing. You have to advocate for yourself. You're going to have to dig in and maybe take this quiz that I'm going to link in the description of this video, and you're going to have to go find a doctor. If you want to, I mean, you always have that choice, right? That's the beauty of all this information I am giving you, is you always have the choice. You can decide to change nothing, or you can decide to change everything. That is the beauty of this time in life, is we have control over all of those things, and we can decide how we want to move forward. If you want to make changes and get a diagnosis if it is needed, and maybe take some medication or do some different strategies or counseling or whatever it is, you have to find some help. You've got to advocate for yourself, find the right professional, someone that knows what they're doing, and just know that there is support and that you deserve to get the help that you need. So I would love to know from you if, number one, you got diagnosed later in life, and then if you did, if there was any connection for you to perimenopause or menopause. If you've kind of realized like the two did not mix well, they didn't play well together, or if you kind of didn't notice too much of a difference, I would love to hear from you on that, because I know that this is going on for other women. I know I'm not the only one, and so I would love to be able to share those stories with other women. I will respond to every single comment that comes my way on this video. And then, as always, if you found this valuable or helpful in any way, I would so appreciate a like, a comment, a subscribe. And then if you know someone where you're really thinking like, maybe one of your best friends is going through something like this. Maybe you don't have ADHD, but you think your best friend might, or a family member might benefit from some of this information, please feel free to share the video. I would be so honored if you would do that, and just share it with someone that you think might find some value in this. So go out there, ladies, and just advocate for yourself. Try hard to accept yourself just right where you're at, and know that you can make changes and get new systems in your life and do new things and have new diagnosis and medications and all the things that you want in life. You deserve all of those things. Move forward, go grab them, advocate for yourself. I will see you next time. Thank you so much.